下出是常行菩萨道。
Oh yeah. So for today's teaching, the main disciples are the people from Taiwan, such as the disciples of Tenzin Chamchen, the late Venerable Tenzin Chamchen, and amongst whom there are people who recently got ordained from me. And so my Dharma friends, the disciples of the late Venerable Tenzin Chamchen, and also people from all the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions in Taiwan, Sakya Nyingma Kyu and Geluk, and us, and also people from other countries. So historically, the Chinese people have been followers of the teaching of the Buddha. So generally speaking, the Chinese people everywhere in the world, wherever there are groups of Chinese, we can see Buddhist temples, and also Vietnamese. Wherever Vietnamese communities are, you have Buddhist temples. In Australia, for example, there is a group of Vietnamese who also have built a huge Buddhist temple. And so, and also Malaysia, there are many Chinese. And many of the people in Malaysia also are Buddhists, and also Indonesia. And so, historically, your traditional religion is Buddhism. So I usually say Chinese historically are the senior disciples of the Buddha. But before that, we have the Pali tradition, followers of the Pali Buddhist tradition in Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Cambodia, and so forth. And so they are the senior, more senior disciples. And then Buddhism, study of Buddhism also was widespread in Takshashila. And then we have the Sanskrit, followers of the Sanskrit Buddhist tradition. So both the Pali tradition, the followers of the Pali tradition, as well as Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, have the same practice of the monastic code of discipline or conduct. And there are, of course, differences. And so, as followers of Sanskrit tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhism spread, which spread to China a few centuries before it spread to Tibet. And so, the Chinese people, on the whole, are the senior students of the Sanskrit Buddhist tradition. And then Tibetans and Mongolians are just junior. But if we compare the knowledge of the senior and junior students, the junior students' knowledge of Buddhism is not so poor. Because in Tibet, thanks to Master Chandarakshita, who was himself a great philosopher, a great scholar. On top of that, he was a great logician, very good at logic. And therefore, in Tibet, he introduced the Nalanda Buddhist tradition in Tibet. And so, as a philosopher and a logician, he also wanted his students to study philosophy through logic and reasoning. And so, thanks to that, his legacy, the Tibetans have followed it, and then amongst the Tibetans we have people like Sakya Pandita, who wrote his own text on epistemology and logic, which is called the Treasury of Reasoning. And so there have been quite many texts on logic. So recently we compiled the different texts that we have in Tibetan regarding the Kanjur and Tenjur, the words, translations of the words of the Buddha and its exegetical texts. We have 300 volumes. And then the sub-commentaries by Tibetan masters to these 300 volumes is 20,000 texts there are. And so, as I said before, by following the Master Chandarakshita's tradition, we study logic, philosophy through logic. And in the case of Madhyamaka, the ornament of Madhyamaka written by Master Chandarakshita, he uses reason. Right in the beginning of his text, the reasoning for establishing emptiness, which is called the lack of one and many. And so, the study of philosophy through logic has spread widely in Tibet. And so, the texts written in Tibetan are written through logic. And as Tibetan Buddhism was being translated into Tibetan, we also, the vocabulary, Tibetan vocabulary for the Dhamma word also increased and developed. And so, historically, we are followers of the Buddha's teaching, and particularly the Nalanda tradition. So we are all followers of the same teacher and the same tradition, Nalanda tradition. And so it's been many years since you have been coming to receive teachings here in Dharamsala. So I'm very happy also that you have come this time again to receive the teachings from me. And you, of course, you have gone through lots of hardships. There has, the coming here involves lots of expenses too. And then, so I would like to thank you. And then there are people from traditionally non-Buddhist countries. There are many of them here today. There are many of you here. So Buddhism, generally speaking, is an Asian tradition. But, of course, other traditions, religious traditions like Christianity, have also spread in Asia. And so the different religious traditions today have become more or less international religions, although they have their own roots in different parts of the world, East and West. But because of people's communications and travel back and forth, we have all the different traditions in Asia also spread to the West, and the Western religious traditions also spreading in the East. And then there are Indians who are, of course, followers of regarding the Buddha himself. He was Indian, and the Nalanda tradition also spread from here. And so the Nalanda, the writings of the Nalanda masters, which we have now, have come from India. And so there are some Indians. For you, Buddhism is more or less your own heritage, your own traditional culture and tradition. And so it would be good for you to preserve it. So it's your own treasure. So today, in India, whether it's Buddhism or Buddhist philosophy, there are, and also Buddhist logic and epistemology, more and more, there are increasingly more a number of Indians taking interest in them. And so you are taking interest and paying attention to your own ancestral tradition and preserving it. So the text that we are going to go through comes from the Nalanda tradition, mainly the chief disciple of the heart son or spiritual son of Master Nagarjuna, who was Master Aryadeva. And so we are going to go through the text written by him, the 400 stanzas. The treatise on the 400 stanzas. I received this transmission from Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, from whom I received, of course, with the 13 great classic texts. And so amongst them are the 5 texts, treatises by Maitreya, which I've already received before receiving from him, from Genrinzing Temba, another Kinori Lama, and then regarding Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, I received a transmission from Tsenchab Rinpoche, Sergon Tsenchab Rinpoche, and also from Kunlama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyaltsen, because he was a great scholar of Sanskrit. He was also consulting the Sanskrit text and gave me explanation, and which is very helpful for me. And then the 400 verses, this text also was amongst the 13 classic texts. I received the transmission from him. So I have not received the reading transmission of anything like that of the commentary to the 400 verses by Master Chandrakirti, but I will just, for auspiciousness, go through the text. So as you make this prayer in Chinese, may the 3 poisons be eliminated and so forth. So in the Indian tradition, there are those of the practitioners of concentration who actually see or consider the desire ram, reflective emotions of desire ram to be gross and to be disadvantageous, and therefore they see them as faulty and try to develop the concentrations of the higher realms of existence, the form realm and so forth. So in other words, in Indian tradition, the negative emotions generally are seen as faulty. But particularly in Buddhism, we have those of the afflictive emotions. Not only do we try to see the faulty nature of the desire ram, afflictive emotions, but of all the 3 realms of existence, the afflictive emotions of all the entire realm of existence. So to eliminate negative emotions, even if you may recite some mantras tens of thousands of times, it will not be, the afflictive emotions will not be eliminated. But in fact, you might even solidify have a more solid kind of a notion of the negative emotions instead of being able to combat it.
Thank you.
So the three poisons, the afflictive emotions, of course, you can help yourself to reduce or to overcome it by seeing the faulty nature of them, but mainly the afflictive emotions such as attachment and hatred are rooted in ignorance, and therefore in the Madhyamaka text, it's very clearly mentioned that we need to overcome this ignorance, which is the root of all the three, all negative emotions, the afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. And particularly amongst the ignorance, we have those of the gross forms or coarse forms of clinging to selfhood, and which in turn are rooted in the subtlest form of ignorance, which is having this or conceiving the true existence in things, independent true existence in things and self. And so with the help of first developing single-pointed concentration, then you should go on to develop the wisdom, the insight, which develops through the help of this single-pointed concentration, and thereby combat this ignorance. And so in order to have that, we need to develop meditation, experience of meditation, and for that you need to develop understanding through reflection, and for that you need to develop understanding through study and listening to the teaching. And so we are engaged in this process of the studying the text. And then in your prayer, the second line says, may all obstacles be averted. So the main obstacle is within ourselves, such as those of the emotions, such as attachment and hatred. So which actually are unfavorable conditions to practicing the Dharma, and therefore we pray for all the obstacles, inner and outer, to go away. And so these two lines have to do with the principle of the practice which leads us to liberation. And then for Bodhisattva practice, not only do we seek to overcome the negative emotions, but also we seek to overcome even the imprints left by them, which is called knowledge obscuration to knowledge. And so not only should we develop the bodhicitta, but with the help of huge amount of merit, the spiritual merit, we need to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is complemented by this huge merit. Although you may develop bodhicitta and meditate on it for eons and eons, you will not be able to overcome even these imprints or latent potencies of imprints of the negative emotions without the wisdom of emptiness or selflessness. And therefore even with regard to the wisdom alone, you will not be able to reach Buddhahood. So you need bodhicitta to help yourself to reach Buddhahood, combined with that wisdom of emptiness. Without bodhicitta, you will not be able to reach Buddhahood. And if you have bodhicitta, with the help of it, you will be able to reach bodhicitta. And therefore, you are in this prayer, you are saying that you are not only you don't only wish to overcome the negative emotions, but also reach Buddhahood through the practice of bodhicitta. And then you also have this line which says, "May the light of wisdom be ablaze in me." And so with regard to this, we have the 25 verses of Prajnaparamita, which is the Heart Sutra, and then we have the other Prajnaparamita, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. First, let us have tea.
诸师利有事于自在，智慧妙体充满至甘，广大持教细海美庄严，至圣手持白莲我供养。
Have your bread too. Kare, coffee. So regarding the perfection of wisdom teachings, the sutras, we have the 100,000 verses of perfection of wisdom. Sometimes it seems that there are texts which are of varied lengths in Chinese and English, in Tibetan, sorry. And then when I was in Japan one time, they told me that there is a text written as a commentary to a Prajnaparamita text by Master Nagarjuna, but I couldn't believe it. So if it were the case that Nagarjuna had written such a text, his disciples like Aryadeva and Chandrakirti and so forth may have quoted from this text, but there is nothing like that. So sometimes Master Tsongkhapa also says that if it is the same, if it's a word Nagarjuna, someone who with the same name as Master Nagarjuna, then of course it may be okay to say that it was written by such a person with that name. So if it's the case that the person had the same name as Master Nagarjuna that we know, then it's okay, but otherwise it's I couldn't believe. So in India also there were masters. There were people who actually just used the names of great panditas and ascribed the text to them. So the Heart Sutra is a perfection wisdom text. And we have many people who also read and recite the Vajracchedaka, the Diamond Cutter Sutra. So I have also taught it many times. So with regard to the Panchaparamita text, these sutras, regarding their content, there is the explicit content and the implicit content. Explicit content is that of emptiness, and therefore there is a lineage which emphasizes that explicit content of the Panchaparamitas, which is called the profound view lineage. And then there is a lineage which comes through the emphasizing the implicit content of the Panchaparamitas, such as how things are in reality, and on the ground level, and then the Bodhisattva parts and the grounds, and then the different powers of the 10 powers of the Buddhas and so forth, which were used as the subject on which the object, which is emptiness, is established. And so there are these two contents of the perfection wisdom teachings, the explicit content of emptiness and the implicit content of the extensive path. And so Master Nagarjuna took the main responsibility to explicate the explicit content, whereas Master Sangha, following Maitreya, explicated that of the implicit content, and therefore, so usually when we talk about Maitreya, we say that in accordance with the Tantra, he is a Buddha, whereas in accordance with Sutrayana, he is a Bodhisattva. And so he resides in the Tushita heaven, we say. But I have once read the Wensek's commentary on the Sandinimochana Sutra, the Sutra unraveling the thought, in which it says the Maitreya's mother's name was Maitri, and therefore the son was named after his mother. And so it seems in India there had been a bodhisattva who was a human being. And so in the case of Maitreya in Tushita heaven, we can't talk about him having a parents as such, but there is this mention in Wensek's commentary. So with regards to the Tushita heaven, it is said that on top of the Mount Meru is the 33 realm of the 33. So whether the Mount Meru does exist or not, we can still talk about the 33 realms of 33, which may not be touching, even if we were to say that the Mount Meru existed. So, from our empirical experience, scientifically, it's very difficult to actually accept the existence of Mount Meru. So it is said that the Mount Meru is 16 leagues or yojanas in height, half of which is underwater and half of which is above water. So it is mentioned the 80,000 leagues are underwater, and then the 80,000 leagues up above water, 40,000. And then regarding the sides of the sun and the moon, according to the Abhidharma text, it's mentioned that there is not much difference between these two. Sign is slightly 1 or yojana or so bigger, it is mentioned, than the moon. And so Master Tsongkhapa has said that someone who actually goes against reason cannot be considered a reliable person. And also we need to follow reason when we establish certain things, as it is done also in Bhaviveka's Targajwala and so forth. So when we talk about certain points, certain subjects, we cannot say that this is so because it is said in such and such non-Buddhist text and or such and such Buddhist text. So if something goes against reason, whether it's said in the non-Buddhist text or Buddhist text, it doesn't matter. We cannot accept them. We can reject even. So if even if something is said in a Buddhist text, if it's against reason, we need to reject it. And so Buddha himself has decisively said that, monks and scholars, just as a gold is tested by burning, cutting, and polishing, likewise, and you should examine my teaching and then accept it after doing the analysis, investigation, and experiment, but not because you have devotion to me. And so the Buddha himself has said, what this shows is that you cannot just accept things blindly if it goes against reason. And so we need to investigate through logic and reasoning, and then also experiment the teachings and test it within ourselves. And when you find it beneficial and also reasonable, then you should accept them. And so this is similar to how scientists do their investigation. So I usually say that although the Buddha lived more than 2,600 years ago, 600 years ago, when I give people the statues of the Buddha or images of the Buddha, I tell them that for Buddhists, he was the founder of our tradition, Buddhism, and he was the fourth from amongst the 1,000 Buddhas who are said to appear in this world. But on the one hand, the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, was a great philosopher who actually made great explanations, detailed explanations of what he teaches to people. And so he was a great philosopher, a great thinker, who used reason and logic. So when he taught the practice to overcome about the relating to our clinging to independent self, or clinging to selfhood, and also self-cherishing attitude, he teaches that all these unhappiness that we have are rooted in our mind, and found the means to overcome our disturbance in mind. And so he was a great thinker. And so when he said that we need to check through reason and logic whether his teachings stand up to the test of reason or not, this shows that he was a scientist. And so an ancient Indian scientist, in fact, we can say. So when we actually examine his teachings through logic and reasoning, we should also be based on the empirical experience when we use reasoning. And so when we study logic, there are certain types of logic which are called logic where the thing is, if it's observable, we should be able to perceive them. If it's not observable, we cannot perceive them. And so, with regard to the Mount Meru, for example, it should be something that is perceptible to us, whereas it does not. We are not able to perceive it. But it is said also that the shadow of Mount Meru falls on us. So we, in a way, kind of enjoy the shadow. But if we were to say that we do enjoy the shadow of Mount Meru, but we cannot actually see the Mount Meru itself, then it's really going against our empirical experience. So if it were the case that going against reason is not right, then it's more so unreasonable to accept something which is against empirical experience. So the Buddha has not come to the world to measure the distance of or the height of Mount Meru, but so whether Mount Meru exists or not doesn't really matter. So on the other hand, we may somebody may accept the Mount Meru and then say that give all these descriptions about Mount Meru. So I usually say that we don't need to be stubborn saying that Mount Meru exists. So whether it exists or not doesn't matter. So about 50 years ago, I have started saying that the Buddha came to the world to teach us the Four Noble Truths, not to measure the world as such. Or draw the lines. So in other words, what I was talking about was the Rama 33, which is said to be on top of the Mount Meru and so forth. And so within that Rama 33, there is the Tushita heaven. There's there are texts written by Maitreya, whether he was a human being or not. And then there are the commentaries to his text, such as by Master Nagarjuna, Master Asanga, such as the 5 text treatises on the levels. And then Master Nagarjuna has written texts like Mula Madhyamaka Karika and also the 60 stanzas of reasoning, in which he shows that to reach even liberation, overcoming all the negative emotions, we must realize emptiness. And then we have Master Aryadeva's 400 stanzas of the middle way. And regarding Tantra, there are the 5 stages written by Nagarjuna, and Aryadeva's commentary on it, which is the compendium of practices. So these texts written by Aryadeva are not in Chinese. So His Holiness was just mentioning that there are these texts in Chinese translation, such as the 6 texts of Madhyamaka written by Nagarjuna, the 400 verses of Aryadeva, the Madhyamaka Avatara and its commentary by Chandrakirti. But then the Prasanapada commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which was written by Chandrakirti, didn't exist in Chinese before, but the Chinese interpreter was telling His Holiness that it's being translated. And then Bhaviveka's Pradiput is there, the wisdom, lamp of wisdom. So have you been able to compare the Chinese translation with the Tibetan? So the Tenzin Chamchen Center, you are studying Tibetan and also you study logic, debate. So I have suggested you to do some research on the different texts available in Chinese and Tibetan. So if you could also check these texts written in Chinese and Tibetan by Bhaviveka, the Lamp of Wisdom. So in China, you have these great classic texts in Chinese, who you are followers of Sanskrit tradition, and then in Tibet, also the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism spread. And we have these two lineages of the systems called the profound view lineage and the extensive practice lineage that spread in Tibet. And as we usually recite, the short Prajaparamita, the Perfect in Wisdom Sutra, is the Heart Sutra. And so in the beginning of the text, there is the dialogue between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. It mentions that all phenomena should be seen as, everything should be seen as having, being empty by nature. So it mentions the word by nature. So what is empty of what? So things are empty by nature of, or inherently. So what that means is that if you try to search for the identity of things and self, you'll never be able to find it. And during the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and also the 12 links of dependent origination. The Buddha actually taught how we go round and round in this cycle of existence, and also how we can actually exit this samsara, the cycle of existence, whereas he does not mention the self as such. He taught selflessness. So although in the during the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught selflessness, and in the Perfect in Wisdom teachings, he even goes on further to say that even the not only the person or being is empty of inherent existence, but even the psychophysical aggregates, the 5 psychophysical aggregates, are empty of inherent existence. So they also are empty of inherent existence. And so this word also is not there in Chinese translations. Therefore, it's not also in Korean and other languages which were translated from Chinese. But in Tibetan, this word is there. And so not being satisfied with that, just because it's in Tibetan, I actually checked it with the Sanskrit original, and so in the Sanskrit, the word also is there. So of course, in the Chinese, traditional Chinese translation, the word also is not there. So of course, you don't need to correct the translation itself that has been done before. But if you actually could have it, think along the line where you can include it, then it's much more, you have a much more broader perspective when you think about emptiness or selflessness. So with regard to the things, if you actually search for its nature, how the things exist, we can see things, visible things, and then they're tangible, But if you actually were to go in search of, go forth in search of these appearances, the physical things, how they exist, what their real nature is, you cannot find it within the physical thing. If you break it down into its smaller units, you will not be able to find anything being the form or appearance as such. And so this is similar to how the scientist, quantum physics, actually says that nothing can be found objectively. So when I have discussions with quantum physicists, they say that as long as there is an observer, there is an observed object, and without an observer, there is no observed object as such. And so, this, with regard to this, in the Chittamatra philosophy, they say that as long as there is a perception of a thing, there is the thing, the thing exists, and whereas if there is no perceiver of the thing, there is no perceived object. And so they say that the object and the subject, for example, the form which is perceived by its perception, visual perception, are of same substance. And there's no, the form does not have any objective external existence according to Chittamatra. So scientists, these scientists, quantum physicists, also do this kind of analysis into the nature of things, and they say that finally nothing can be found objectively existing. And this is similar to how the Chittamatras also have done lots of investigation into the nature of things. So they say that when you actually try to find the thing, for example, the appearance or the physical things, and when you search for their nature or identity within themselves, you will not be able to find anything. And the things do appear to have some kind of an existence from their own side. And so they say they don't exist the way they appear to us. But that doesn't mean, if you ask, does it mean that the form does not exist? No, it doesn't mean that. If you say that form does not exist, physical objects do not exist, then it's actually going against empirical experience. But they do not exist by way of their own nature, or and that means that they exist by way of dependence on others. If things were to exist, if physical objects and other things were to exist independently, without by their own nature as such, then they cannot depend on other factors. So, when we say that things do not have any self-identity and independent existence, that means that they are dependent. And so if they are dependent, they cannot be independently existing. And so, similarly, it is the case with regard to the cause being dependent on or being posited or in relation to its effect. So although at the time of the cause itself, the fruit or the effect has not yet arisen, but because the effect is going to arise in relation to that effect, we are talking about a cause, something as a cause. And therefore, a cause cannot exist if independently of its effect. And therefore, the Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. So which means that form does not exist independently. So, and so because form is empty of inherent existence, and empty of inherent existence, but then while being empty, a form actually serves its function, and therefore it is said that the form arises in dependence on many other factors, and therefore emptiness is form, it is said. And then form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form too. Actually teaches us that they are distinct, conceptually distinct, but in essence the same nature. And so, with regard to the Heart Sutra, what is the purpose of emptiness then? In the Heart Sutra, it is mentioned that on the basis of depending on the perfection of wisdom, the Bodhisattvas become fully enlightened Buddhas. The three Buddhas of the three times become enlightened in dependence on the perfection of wisdom, it says. So all the Buddhas of the three times, by means of the perfection of wisdom, fully awaken to the unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment, it says. So in the 18th chapter of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, I usually quote this verse, which says, by elimination of the afflictive emotions and karma, there is liberation, and affliction and karmas arise through conception. And when I was teaching in Ladakh in August, I gave the people the commitment to commit to their memory this verse. The next two lines, this verse, and so as a commitment for this receiving this teaching from me, you also should memorize this verse. And so this verse is very important, in fact. So from this we can understand the purpose of emptiness, that it is relevant and necessary to understand. Otherwise, it would sound like talking about emptiness is like some kind of composing or writing some kind of a thesis for PhD. That's not the case. So today also, when people write their thesis or books, if they have something that they consider to be original thought, it's considered very special. And so this is not the case with regard to the writings by Master Nagarjuna and so forth. He didn't write these texts on emptiness to show off his scholarship. But we don't want suffering, do we? And so we naturally have this wish not to have suffering, but we want happiness. So if we don't want suffering, we can understand that suffering also is transient because it comes through causes and conditions. And so we need to think about the cause leading to suffering. In the 18th chapter again, it is mentioned that we are just a mass of suffering. So in order to overcome suffering, we need to actually find or look into its cause and then find the means to overcome that cause. And so in this verse that I was asking you to commit, it says, by eliminating afflictions and karma, there is liberation. So afflictions and karmas are the causes of our suffering. And so suffering will cease if you are able to stop these two causes. And therefore, by seizing these two the afflictions and karma, you will reach liberation. And then karma and afflictions also come through conception. And so karmas arise through afflictions, afflictive emotions, and they in turn arise through conceptions or the inappropriate thinking. And then these inappropriate thinking or fantasizing also arise through clinging to true existence and things, which is termed as elaboration or fabrication. In this line, the third line says, they arise through fabrication, and fabrication is ended by emptiness. And so, with regard to our actions, many of them actually ensue from our attachment and anger. And so anger and attachment arise through misconceptions or this kind of inappropriate thinking. So this is also what the scientists also say. So when we become angry, for example, one scientist told me that when we actually perceive the person or the thing which we are angry at to be totally negative, and so the scientist, psychiatrist Aaron Beck, an American scientist, told me this, that 90% of that negativeness that we perceive is our own mental projection. And so from his decades of dealing with people with mental disturbance, psychiatric disturbance, so from all these experience, he actually summed up that this person a person or thing whom we are angry at, and we perceive as totally negative, that negativeness, 90% of it is our own mental projection, he says. So this is exactly what Nagarjuna says here. And Master Nagarjuna also says that the attachment, anger, or hatred and ignorance arise through our conceptions. So when we actually see something attractive, we kind of add more, exaggerate that attractiveness and then become attached. And then also when we see something unattractive or that's then we again do the same and kind of inappropriate thinking, and then anger arises. And so is in the 23rd chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, this is mentioned. So the purpose of emptiness is to reduce and this inappropriate mentation. So it's not enough just to say that anger, attachment are bad, but we need actually to see how we actually exaggerate something that is beautiful through inappropriate mentation, and also how we exaggerate the person whom we become angry by saying this is a bad person, and then exaggerate over it, and then become generate hatred. And there is aversion towards that person, and with the attachment we have attraction towards the person. And so that those kind of exaggerated way of looking at things in turn want some kind of a solid target, and therefore we have anger actually seizing at that kind of a solid target, and also the attachment. And so this kind of fabrication or the inappropriate thinking comes through holding on to such a solidly existing person out there, and existing as if it exists kind of truly and independently. But things are relative, actually. Neither absolutely attractive or nor absolutely unattractive, and that we turn our back to. So it's been 60 years since I thought about emptiness, and over the years of contemplating on emptiness, I may be able to say that I have got some experience that has arisen through reflection on emptiness, not through meditation yet. Because that means, if I were to say that I have the experience of emptiness through meditation, that would be saying that I have reached the path of preparation or something like that. That's not the case. So I have thought about the negative emotions and how our inappropriate way of thinking, this exaggerated way of looking at things, actually cause us all these negative emotions, attachment, anger, and so forth. And therefore, it's the purpose of emptiness, and the significance of meditation and emptiness is to overcome this clinging to some solidity in things. Of course, becoming empty through meditation on emptiness cannot just happen immediately. So we need to follow the process which is mentioned in the Heart Sutra mantra, which says the gate, which refers to the path of accumulation. Which is the path of when we have the genuine sense of wanting to reach liberation truly, genuinely. And then you go along the rest of the path of preparation, when you have developed the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is coupled with which is the coupled with the combination of vipassana and concentration. And then after that, you reach the path of seeing, where you actually realize emptiness directly, and then you further progress onto the path of meditation, and then finally become enlightened, referred by Bodhi Swaha. So this is how we should progress along the path. And with regard to the Mahayana path, we have to add the path, the principle of bodhicitta on that. So the moment you have the experience of bodhicitta, genuine sense experience of bodhicitta, you have entered the path, Mahayana path of accumulation, and then you go on with the rest of the path. And so, for that, a genuine experience of bodhicitta, we need to train our mind, of course, in the beginning, and then have some kind of a simulated experience of bodhicitta. And then if you would push yourself further, you'll have this genuine experience of bodhicitta. And so it comes through training of the mind. And so what I was actually dealing with is this the line where you say, which you say in Chinese, made the wisdom light be a blade. So all of us make prayer for all sentient beings, and so in the text, there's mention of trichilocosm, or the world systems as numerous as the grains of sand in the Ganges. And so, which means there's, the world system is limitless. So even within our own galaxy, there is an infinite number of stars and other objects in the heavens. So we cannot do much directly to all beings living in this infinite universe, but on this earth, we have ways to, of course, help others in this world. But with regard to the animals and living in the waters and in land, birds and so forth, when they suffer, we can't do much, can we? And so we can feel compassion. Because when we talk about overcoming suffering, we need to actually understand how we need to deal with the mind, bring transformation within our mind. So these animals, birds and so forth, do not have the same kind of a brain that we as human beings have. And so we have the opportunity to serve the 7 billion people on this earth, directly or indirectly in a way. So I'm not saying that all of us have to become Buddhist or even religious practitioners, but because we have this marvelous brain with which we can think through. So, and think about our suffering, with which there is the sensorial experience of suffering, and then the mental ones. And the sensorial ones are minor compared to the experience of pain and pleasure of our mind. And so the mental pain and pleasure experience of them are greater or more intense. So many of them are our own because of our own projection. So in order to have happiness, we need to focus on the mind itself mainly. And we need to also understand that there is possibility to actually transform, go through and make transformation within our mind and overcome the negative factors and have happiness. And therefore, we have the opportunity to do that. For that, you don't need to become a Buddhist nor a religious practitioner. But because we instinctively want happiness and not suffering, so the material development are for our sensorial experience. It will reduce, it may have reduced our pain and dissatisfaction regarding our body or the sensory experiences. So, for example, in Taiwan, you have lots of material development and you have economical developments, but people who are rich have more suffering, don't they? So those of the monks who are debating, can you say that if you are richer, you have more happiness? No, can you? But most of the people are more or less lost in the experience of, trying to find the sensorial, happiness through the sensorial experience, some kind of a gratification. So we need to actually learn what are the causes, the factors which disturb our peace of mind, and what are the antidote to them. So the existing modern education does not include teaching on how to develop peace of mind as such. So if you have real peace of mind, you will actually be honest with others. So they go together. And therefore, I've been trying to promote we are working on a curriculum, a textbook for teaching secular ethics without touching any religion as such. And so, whether you call it secular or not, something, a curriculum for the school systems, which without touching any religion. So there are people, scientists working on it, other scholars, educationists, and in the West, Americans, and also from India. So we are trying to create some curriculum to introduce in our modern education system for people to have more peace of mind. So these come through Indian, the traditional culture actually, but it has more or less declined. In India itself, when I talk with the non-Buddhists, the Hindus and so forth in India, I tell them that in the past, in the ancient times, you have all these profound and deep and vast knowledge which you must revive in modern times. So regarding the study of the mind and emotions, psychology and so forth, the study of it is quite prevalent amongst the Buddhists still. So just as I tell people, just as that we take care of physical hygiene, we must also take care of the mental hygiene, hygiene of mind. So if we put effort in we could have a more compassionate world, and one of the main factors for that is many scientists have actually, through their experiment, have found that the experiment on children, pre-language children, like 3-4 months old, to whom the scientists actually in their experiment showed certain pictures or cartoons. When they showed a cartoon where two children are playing and one helping each other, and the infant child, when they see this, they really when the children in the cartoon are very friendly, the infant actually has positive reaction, and they actually laugh and are happy. Whereas in another cartoon, in which the scientists showed these infants that the one child is trying to push a ball up the hill, and then another child comes and actually pushes it down and obstructs the first child. And then when the infant child to whom this is shown sees it, they have a quite negative expression on their face. And then one most important thing is that the scientists say that if you are constantly overcome with anger and fear and so forth, your immune system is also depleted. And so if you are more compassionate and peaceful in your mind, the immune system is strengthened. And so our emotions have this kind of effect on our immune system, and it has, of course, then effect on our body, our health as well. And therefore, through these kind of experiments, the scientists actually sum up and conclude that the basic nature of human beings is compassionate. So then we can see there is hope for us. If human nature, human nature is negative, anger or something like that, then we cannot be hopeful. So even just within this life, if you are more compassionate, you have better health and more peace of mind. Your family will be more friendly and happy. If you have If that kind of family could actually spread to 10, 100, and 1,000, then we would have more people having real happiness. So we have the means to promote such thing. If you look at the world today, here we are peaceful, without much mental problem. But at the same time, in other parts of the world, like Syria, right this moment, people are being killed, bombarded, and fired with guns. And then children die. And in Africa also, people die of starvation and so forth. So these are man-made problems, our own creation, which must be solved by ourselves, humans. We cannot pray to the Buddha to solve this problem, to overcome it. So I usually tell people that if we have the opportunity to have the vision of the Buddha, for example, or for the Christians, Jesus Christ, or for the Muslims, the Muhammad, and then other religions have their own founders and gods. If people have the way to see these higher powers and ask them to bring peace, they will ask us, who actually disturbed the peace in the world? If the disturbances were caused by the gods, then of course we can ask them to solve this. But because disturbances were caused by us, we cannot actually do away with it, resolve it by praying to God or Buddha and so forth. So if the situation in the world remain like this, the way it is now, it's going to be quite unfortunate. In this 21st century, how many people have been killed, were killed in the 20th century? 200 million and more were killed through wars and battles. So how much disturbance this may have caused to the people who, the survivors of their family members who were killed. So what has happened is that we believed that we should be able to overcome problems through force, military force. And then we also thought that by resorting to military force, we can actually win and defeat the other party. But that has not been the case. So we need to have oneness, sense of oneness of human beings, that we all of us are same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So for the theistic religious followers, everything was created by God. And then all of us creatures are same in wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. So if the 7 billion people are at peace, at ease, then we as individuals could naturally, automatically benefit. We will be in peace and at ease. So whether you are followers, believer or non-believer, theistic or non-theistic followers of religions, there's none who don't want happiness and who want suffering. And so as human beings, all my Dharma brothers and sisters, try your best to promote human love and compassion. I would like to urge you to keep this in mind. We all, as Buddhists, pray for all sentient beings. And so, practically, if we could work for the 7 billion people on this earth, we can do something, can't we? And so, this is about my first commitment, the commitment for promotion of human values. And then the second commitment that I have is religious harmony. It's quite unfortunate and quite very sad that religion today, even religion is used to create problem for people. Religions teach us love and compassion. Nobody is against love and compassion, but the very means of the religion which teaches us the practice of compassion and love is used to cause more suffering to others. And doing so, what we are doing is that we actually turn this medicine for our happiness into poison. And the religious harmony is possible if we look at the example of India. India is a living example for religious harmony. For over 1,000 years, for few thousand years, many different religious traditions have lived together, coexisted peacefully in this land. So there are homegrown religions as well as the emigrated religions. So all of them live together harmoniously in this country. And therefore, we, all of us, and Buddhists, for example, this is one of our responsibilities to create religious harmony. Of course, philosophically, these religious traditions have different philosophies which are needed, in fact, because of the different mental dispositions of different beings. Even within Buddhism, we have the 4 different main philosophical schools, Vaibhashikas, Saudantikas, Chittamatras and Madhyamakas. And within each of them, there are sub-schools also. And so all of these 4 major philosophical schools were taught by the same teacher, the Buddha himself. Why did he teach all these conflicting philosophies? Is because of the different mental dispositions amongst his followers and disciples, and therefore one philosophical idea or one's philosophical thought or teaching will not be suitable to every one of them. So the Buddha gave teaching on the 4 Noble Truths, and then the gross level of selflessness, and then the subtle level of selflessness of persons, and then went on into the subtlest form of emptiness, that things have no true existence. So while the fact that the Buddha taught these differing philosophical thoughts or ideas and concepts shows that people of different mental dispositions need different philosophical concepts and ideas, and therefore the reasoning also applies to the people in this world at large. Because of the different mental dispositions, we have the different philosophical thoughts of the different religious traditions. And in Kalachakra, there are the Lagu Tantra of Kalachakra. There are 5 chapters, and it is mentioned in the inner chapter. We cannot discriminate other religious traditions through bias and prejudice. But that doesn't mean that we have to have faith in all the religious traditions, but we need to, while keeping faith in our own tradition, in one's own tradition, we can still respect the other religious traditions. So please keep this in mind. So we'll have a break here for 15 minutes.
Things, subjects, and objects that are commonly, that everybody commonly sees together. Yeah,
So all religious traditions teach us love and compassion. And even the theistic religious traditions, which say that everything is created by God, is a very powerful teaching. When the followers think along the line that they were created, all human beings in this world were created by the same God, I mean, they should really be able to draw inspiration not to harm others, but consider and regard the other human beings as one's brothers and sisters. So none of these religious traditions, the theistic religious traditions, actually say that their God, the Creator, is full of anger, but they say that the God is full of love. And this father figure is said to be full of love, and therefore we as creations or creatures of this God have the gene of that Father, of the Father. And so since this very life is for us is created by God, the followers could feel close to, have a closeness feeling to God. And so if they really sincerely practice their religion, they are very good. These religions are. And so all religious traditions teach love and compassion, affection. And therefore, in the practice of love and compassion, to combat our anger, there's teaching on tolerance. And then also forgiveness, and not harboring any kind of animosity towards others. And so they are very good. So the different philosophical traditions, the philosophical concepts regarding them, amongst my friends, Christian friends, for example, one time I was in nearby Barcelona in Spain, in Montserrat. And so I went there. When I reached there, the monks there told me that a Christian practitioner wanted to see me. And so that practitioner had been meditating in the hills behind the monastery, in Montserrat Monastery, for 5 years without any proper food, but hot meals, but bread and water. And so when I met him, I told him that I heard you spent 5 years in meditation as a hermit, and what did you practice? And so during that he said, in response he said he meditated on love. And when he said that, there was a special significance in his eyes. So a sincere, true practitioner of Christianity would be like that. And then Thomas Merton was another Christian brother. He woke up very early in the morning and then meditated on the qualities of God, the Creator, and he was very open-minded as well. And for example, if we look in India, for example, there are in very remote Indian villages, there are Christian brothers and sisters serving these poor communities. I mean, amongst Tibetan Buddhists, there are none like that. So I was in Thailand once. At that time, the Sangharaja, the head of this Buddhist order of Thailand, I told him that Christians have, they serve communities, through health and education. As Buddhists, we don't do that, and we should do. And he told me that as Buddhist practitioners, we need to stay away from the mundane life. And so today what I say is that Buddhism should be preserved not just by monastics, but also by the general public. And therefore, we need to educate the general public in our tradition, without which it will be difficult for just the monks and nuns to preserve the dharma. And then, in the end, the pond of the monastic community might dry up, and without the lay community understanding the dharma. So with regard to the general structure teaching of Buddhism, we need to understand the Four Noble Truths and then those of 37 harmonies to enlightenment. And so with regard to the religious traditions, there are those of the non-theistic religious traditions, such as Jainism and Buddhism. So in the West, I tell people that we are sinners as Buddhists because we don't accept Creator God. And I tell them that for me, I would go to the hell realm in the next life. And so some friends even have told me that they're also going to join me in hell. So from the point of view of the theistic religions, we are all sinners because of not accepting Creator. But it doesn't matter. So philosophically, we may have different concepts, different ideas and understanding, but they have their own significance. So I've recently heard that today in China proper, in China there are 400 million Buddhists, and on a BBC broadcast I recently heard that people from rural areas come to the cities to find work, and many of them convert to Christianity. And one of the journalists asked some people the question, and in response to their questions why they have become Christians, the response was that when they were living in their village, they actually heard that religion is blind faith, and then the communism spread, which has no faith. But they found that without religion, something is missing in them, and therefore they need something to keep their hope alive, and therefore they have turned to Christianity. So it's important for those people who give teachings to others to explain the teaching of the Buddha well. And also the audience themselves, if they could listen properly, correctly, then they could also understand that the Nalanda tradition that we have, the Buddhism that we have, actually is based on reason, and we can actually explain it through reason, like scientists. So the way we can explain through reason and logic, experiment, so forth, will actually give us this understanding that Buddhism is scientific. So of course for those people who cannot do much critical thinking, for them maybe it's enough just to teach briefly without elaboration through reason and logic. But for those who are able to actually think through with reason, one time I was told by somebody that all of us are created by God, and the God is full of love, but there are many bad people amongst His creation. Why so? He asked me, and so in response I said to him, just friendly to him, half jokingly, I told him that God has created hell realm also, and therefore there must be people going to go to hell. So otherwise, the creating a hell realm doesn't actually serve any purpose. So in the Pramana Vartika, the valid commentary on valid cognition by Dhammakirti, there is this It is said that the theistic religious traditions say that the Ishvara created God, the different things in the universe, and these things actually go through change, are subject to change, whereas Ishvara is said to be permanent without changing. So that is actually contradictory. The main practice of the following a theistic religion, for example, is the practice of compassion and love. So then, if you can do that, it's very good. I actually say that avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions is something which is common to all religious traditions, except in the case of the wrong view, which may have to be interpreted according to the individual religions. So otherwise, not killing, not stealing, and not committing sexual misconduct, and so forth. The physical and verbal actions, as well as covetousness and so forth, are same practice. So of these 10 virtuous, avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, of them, the 9 are basically common to all. We can all. So if you could practice them well, you will be able to create causes for a higher rebirth in the next life, and then you through accumulating merit. So, as I said earlier, the Buddha gave teaching, taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which has the twofold content. The explicit content of emptiness and implicit content of this extensive path. And so with regard to the 400 verses, because Master Nagarjuna wrote the Mula Madhyamaka Karika treatise on the verses of the middle way, they were called wisdom, as a supplement to that, Master Aryadeva wrote the 400 stanzas. So the Buddha himself actually held this understanding of emptiness very important and significant. Right at the beginning, after he became enlightened, he said, I have found this nectar-like dharma, which is profound, peaceful, non-exaggerated, and non-fabricated, uncompounded, and clear light. Even if I were to teach it to others, no one will understand, therefore I'll remain silent in the forest. And so he said, because it's difficult for other people to understand at that time, it was like a profound teaching, which is like a nectar. That was actually the case. The time when the Buddha appeared in this world was a time when India had all these religious traditions in which they believed in or asserted the theory of Atma or soul. And in their explanation of the Atma, they say that this Atma never changes, it goes from one life to the next, and it is single, and that it is unchanging and autonomous. And so, if the Buddha were to go forth and tell people that this is not true, that there is no such a self or Atma, and people will not be able to take it, would not have been able to take it. And then, as people's receptivity to the teaching of the Buddha, kind of through their familiarization with the Buddha, and found the Buddha's deeds, his the way he acts and teaches amazing, then the Buddha gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, in which he actually taught by repeating the Four Noble Truths 3 times. The first time he taught it by focusing on the nature of them, and then the second time he repeated it to focusing on the function, and then the third time he focused on the fruit of it. So he taught the causality, law of causality, which says that things arise through causes and conditions. And therefore, with regard to the Four Noble Truths, the suffering is something to be overcome, and the suffering and the origin of suffering are to be overcome, and then this true cessation and true path are to be cultivated and actualized. And so when he taught about suffering, the Buddha was mainly referring to suffering which is called the deeper suffering, called the universal, all pervasive, conditioned existential suffering. And so if you wish to be out of this, free from this, then you need to overcome the cause of them, which is its cause, which is the afflictive emotions, the disturbing emotions, which comprise karma and afflictive emotions. And by overcoming these two, you need to reach the higher liberation. And in order to be able to overcome these, you need to go through the process of overcoming the coarser levels of negative emotions, and then go into the practices of overcoming the subtle negative emotions and so forth. And then we need to reach true cessation. And so true cessation is our goal. So the quality of the true cessation means that we need to, in order to achieve it, we need to overcome the negative emotions. Because the cessation is the overcoming, the quality of having overcome the negative emotions. And this has to be done by applying the counter forces or antidotes to them. Therefore, we need to cultivate the path, the true path. And therefore, we have the twofold causality pertaining to liberation, the true cessation, which comes through the path. And in order to overcome suffering, we need to overcome the cause of suffering, which is the origin of suffering. And so these two make up the causal, the causal chain within the four, the leading to in samsara. And so the Buddha said, in order to overcome our samsaric, this unenlightened existence, we need to understand or realize that there is no Atman or no independent self as such, which is permanent, single and autonomous. And so the Buddha has said that just as a chariot is chariot is labeled on the basis of its parts, likewise a self, a person is labeled on the basis of its aggregates. And so And so before this verse, the Buddha has said that the notion of a self is like devilish mind, and this is the root of all other distorted ways of looking at things. And since all these a being is devoid of any independent the five psychophysical aggregates, and therefore there is no self which is separate from these five psychophysical aggregates, and which actually is seen to be like a ruler of the psychophysical aggregates. And so such a self is not there. So therefore there is no self. In that case, is self non-existent? Then that's not the case. The Buddha goes on to say, just as a chariot is designated on the basis of its parts put together, likewise a person is designated on the basis of its psychophysical aggregates. And so, by teaching the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha taught the coarse understanding of the selflessness. And then, in connection with that, he also taught the 37 harmonies of enlightenment, such as the establishment of mindfulnesses, the four endeavors, the four the 5 miraculous feet and so forth. And so when I meet with the Burmese or Sri Lankan monks or Thai monks, I actually have discussions on these 4 Noble Truths. And regarding these 4 Noble Truths, there are 4 characteristic features of each of them as well, which make up 16 characteristics of the 4 Noble Truths. These are all common to both the Pali and Sanskrit traditions. These are very important points to actually contemplate. I do contemplate on the 4 Noble Truths and 16 attributes, and also the 37 harmonies of enlightenment. So these are very helpful to me. And so the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, in that the Buddha taught these them, and then in the second turning, so during this first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha first said, this is this true suffering, this is true origin of suffering, and this is true cessation, and this is the true path. And then he said, the suffering must be known, its origin must be overcome, the true cessation must be actualized, and then the true path must be cultivated. And then at the third repetition on the 4 Noble Truths, he says, he said, the suffering must be known, but there's nothing to be known. Since you have, once you have overcome suffering, there's nothing to be known as such. When you have, once you have actually seen the true nature of suffering itself, there is nothing to be known about suffering. And then regarding this, regarding the origin of suffering, also he said it must be overcome, but there's nothing to be overcome. And similarly, this maxim is applied to the other two truths. And then when the disciples matured further in their spiritual receptivity and experience, then the Buddha taught the teaching of the perfection of wisdom teachings. And in that he taught more detailed on true cessation and true path. And so, because of the more advanced understanding of the view of selflessness, you can also find that the second turning of the wheel also gives us more deeper understanding of ignorance, the subtler ignorance. And then in the third turning of the wheel, within the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, there is the Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, this sutra unraveling the thought, which is Chittamatra Sutra, and which is actually called the turning of the wheel of the Dharma, clearly distinguishing the 3 natures, the nature which are the dependent nature, the imputed nature, and then the perfect or consummate nature. And so by thinking about the characteristics of these 3 natures, the Buddha taught these 3 natures. So in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, according to the Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, the Prajaparamita Sutras cannot be taken literally, but the Buddha said that things have no, things lack identity because of these 3 characteristics of the 3 natures. And so, if we look at the nature of the mind itself, whether we have to and check whether the negative emotions, the disturbing emotions, are in the intrinsic nature of the mind or not. The Buddhism says that the disturbing emotions must be overcome, but these disturbing emotions are not in the intrinsic nature of the mind itself, whereas in certain non-Buddhist traditions they do say that this is intrinsic. And since the mind, the nature, basic nature of the mind is luminous, and therefore these disturbing emotions can be overcome. And in the Mahayana Uttara Tantra, it is said that the stains on the mind are adventitious, and the nature of mind is clear light or luminous. And we have the potential for developing the mind further and further, and on the basis of the very nature of the mind being awareness, they're having this knowing nature, and therefore we have this potential to develop the powers, the qualities of Buddhahood. And so this is taught clearly in the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, the essence of the Tathagata Sutra. So, which is the source text for Maitreya's Mahayana Uttara Tantra. And so in this, the mind's nature is said to be luminous or clear light. And then with regard to the having taught this, then to understand the subtle, the degrees of subtlety within the mind, then the Buddha actually led the disciples into Tantra. So just as it is said in the Sandhya Sutra, of course the Buddha taught, turned the three wheels of Dharma. So the text that we are going to go through is like a commentary to the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and it is actually a commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna. In the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Master Nagarjuna, after the salutation verses, he just right away starts by saying, not from self, not from other, not from both, neither, anything, anywhere arises. So he goes right into the teaching of emptiness. And so with regard to the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, we need to first study the 26th chapter, which shows how we actually enter into samsara through the 12 links of dependent origination. And then we should start study chapter 18, because without understanding emptiness, we will not be able to destroy the samsara. And then, with regard to emptiness of emptiness, it is said that if this self were, if the aggregates were self, then it would have arising and disintegration, and so forth. So when the Madhyamaka say that there is, even in conventional terms, nothing exists by way of their own characteristics, defining characteristics as such. And so in the 18th chapter, the Master Nagarjuna actually goes through the rejecting the criticisms from other traditions, other philosophical schools about emptiness, saying that emptiness means nothing. And then he goes on to actually make clear the nature of emptiness, what is the nature of emptiness and what is the meaning and the purpose. And so, to destroy the objectification of things as having some true independent existence, we have the objects and then the experience within ourselves. And so although somebody may be able to say that things have no existence outside, external existence, things do not exist, yet it will not help to counter the clinging to some kind of a essential existence of the mind itself, of our experiences. And then even in the case of the Savatantrika Madhyamikas, they say that things have some essential existence, self-defined characteristics from their own side. And they say that the things appear as if they have, things appear to have some true existence, some kind of objective existence, sorry. And just as they appear, things do have objective existence, according to Savatantrika Madhyamikas. Whereas, therefore, they're still left with some objectification in their mind, in their philosophical assertion. And then the Prasankika Madhyamikas say that nothing whatever has any true existence or as self-identified or self-characterized, defined characteristics, and even conventionally, and that helps to counter our objectification of things. So as long as there's something left to have some objective existence, you have not done away with objectifying things. But while being able to say that while things do appear to have some objective independent existence, yet there is no objective existence, no objectification whatever is left for you. And the emptiness is a negative phenomena. And within the negative phenomena, there are the implicative, implicative and non-implicative negative phenomena. And so when you actually are able to say that things have no existence the way they appear to us, not so much like saying things don't exist the way they appear, but you have to be able to be decisive here. And so the purpose of emptiness is to curb or to stop this clinging to true existence. So true existence means the appearance, which is that of true existence of things that appears to you. So in order to overcome this clinging, you should be able to reject that way of existence. And so, having in your absorption meditation, you may be absorbed. I mean, you should be absorbed in emptiness, where nothing whatever is objectified. And then, when you come out of that absorption and emptiness, and what happens is you'll be able to confirm that things do appear to as if they have some independent objective existence. Yet from your experience you can confirm they don't exist that way. And therefore from the yogi's experience, it is said that the emptiness is not expressible or beyond thought, and the experience of emptiness cannot be expressed or explained just as one has experienced to others. And therefore, emptiness is said to be inexpressible and inconceivable. And then, and with regard to the meaning of emptiness, in the 24th chapter, it is said, whatever is dependent or originated is said to be empty. It is designated, it is said to be designated, and therefore, and that is the middle way. So when saying things are empty, Madhyamakas say, the Sankhya Madhyamakas say that we don't say that things don't exist, but that things exist. Things have no essential, true or independent existence, but they exist by way of dependence on others. So this verse verse chapter 24, after that is followed by this other verse which says, there is nothing which is not dependent, therefore there's nothing which is not empty. And so since the 400 verses by Aryadeva is written as a supplement to the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, the text itself does not have any verse of salutation as such. And so since the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and its characteristics, this text also touches on the first four chapters touches on, goes through the four characteristics of suffering, which are impermanence, suffering, and then impurity and selflessness. And so, to go through the text, the title in Sanskrit, in Indian language, is Chatushataka Shastra Karika Nama, and in Tibetan, this is translated as Tenjo Shijaba Shijaba Cheba. And the English translation, you have the text, the treatise called 400 Stanzas. So I wanted to read some lines from the commentary by Master Chandrakirti. Here I intend to explain in detail a single commentary, in a single commentary, the meaning of the verses of the 16 chapters of the Bodhisattva Yoga Chatushataka, written by Aryadeva. So this is a commentary of Chandrakirti, not in the book that you have been distributed. So to communicate its main purpose, it is said, after first analyzing how ordinary things really exist, gradually ultimate reality will be explained. So it says, emptiness is difficult to actually comprehend, but when you say that things are dependent, which may be difficult to understand at first, but things are dependent, therefore you can see that they are subject to change, impermanence. And so, since they come from their causes and conditions, they are under the power of their causes and conditions. And so, the understanding of dependent origination is first established through the teaching on dependent origination of causality. So after first analyzing how ordinary things really exist, so we can see the gross form of impermanence with our own eyes, of course, but with regard to the subtle form of impermanence, which is change moment by moment, I've actually seen through microscopes how atoms, the particles, within the atoms actually move without staying even a second. And so at that level, of atomic level, we can actually see things changing from moment to moment. So in the past, of course, people didn't have these kind of instruments, but when you have these microscopes and you can see, and therefore in the past people just used logic to actually establish that things are changing moment by moment. And whereas today, since we can see this change in atomic level, through the microscopes, it's almost like empirical experience for us. And so, with regard to the suffering, through suffering, its cause are the karma, contaminated karma, and the negative emotions, and within the negative emotions, those of the ignorance. And so we can see how the change that is happening as us is caused by this. So by understanding of impermanent nature of ourselves, the things, the change is subject because of their causes and conditions, and therefore, since we are under the power of the negative emotions and our karmas, and therefore we can actually understand that there's nothing that we can actually grasp as having some selfhood. So gradually, it says, ultimate reality will be explained. So after first analyzing how ordinary things really exist, gradually, ultimate reality will be explained. And so, by leading the disciples through the understanding of the gross forms of impermanence and then selflessness, they will be led into, what this says is they will be led into the ultimate form of selflessness. The first 4 chapters in the text explain how ordinary things really exist. The 5 aggregates, beginning with form, originate in independence upon causes and conditions. Since they have an origin, they are impermanent. Whatever is impermanent is certainly painful, because impermanence endures its nature. Whatever is painful is always impure, because it produces disgust. Whatever is impure is not a self, because it is wrong to generate I and mind towards a thing that must be rejected, and wrong to embrace egotism and selfishness. Since an ordinary thing appear different from what it is due to such an illusion, it is only after understanding that it must be repudiated that Buddhahood will be attained. The 5th chapter explains the Bodhisattva's actions. So first the text explains that these 400 verses teaches what is actually could be our own experience, from our own experience, what is obvious. And so the 5th chapter explains the Bodhisattva actions, because proper explanations about the Bodhisattva's actions lead to attaining Buddhahood. The 6th chapter investigates the afflictions, because domination by the afflictions impedes our Bodhisattva's actions. The 7th chapter examines sensual pleasures, because they are the reason that the afflictions arise, persist, and increase. Sensual pleasures are also the reason that afflictions arise in human beings whose perspective is fundamentally wrong about sense objects, whose misunderstanding the inherent nature of things, who misunderstand the inherent nature of things. Since the mental stream of a student who wants to receive these instructions on the inherent nature of things must be prepared, this treatise's 8th chapter is the preparation for the instructions on ultimate reality. So the 8 subsequent chapters explain that things do not have a nature of their own. This is a summary of the Chatushataka. And so the text goes through first what is obvious to us, and then having understood them, then it goes into the more profound explanations of the practice of bodhisattvas, and then the subtle selflessness and so forth. And so this is what Master Chandrakirti writes. So it's 11:30, so it's time for food. So we could just begin the teaching, and I'll stop here for today.